The sound of coins hitting the floor rang out like a quiet thunderclap inside Harrington's Fine Foods, the most exclusive grocery store in the city. Emma Bennett held her twins close, little Mason and Sophie, barely 2 years old, while she watched the last of her coins roll across the polished tile. Her eyes, which had once sparkled like the eyes of a much younger woman, now carried only exhaustion and a quiet, desperate determination that only a mother fighting for her children's survival could ever truly understand. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're still about $4 short," murmured the young cashier Caleb, avoiding her gaze. He had worked there long enough to recognize the silent desperation hiding behind a forced smile, and he had never quite gotten used to the ache it left in his chest. Emma took a slow breath, feeling the weight of curious, judgmental stares from the other shoppers. Harrington's, tucked into the wealthiest corner of the city's Gold Coast, was known for serving only the elite. Everything on its shelves cost 3 times what it did anywhere else, but it was also the one place where, late in the evening, she could sometimes find a few discounted items, back when she still had steady work, cleaning houses, for one of the well-off families in the neighborhood. Mason began to fuss, reaching his small, chubby hands toward the carton of whole milk that was being slid back across the counter. "Milk, Mommy, I want milk," he said, his sweet little voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade. Sophie, quieter by nature, only watched with those enormous eyes that seemed to understand far more than any child her age should have to. "Then I suppose I'll have to put it back," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Each word felt like it was cutting her own throat on the way out. "Just the milk, please." She had counted those coins 3 times before ever reaching the register. She had saved every last cent for weeks, taking whatever extra cleaning job she could fit between caring for 2 toddlers. That milk had meant more than nutrition. It had meant hope. The hope of watching her children grow up strong and healthy. The store was crowded that Saturday morning. Wealthy families pushed carts overflowing with imported goods, expensive wine, premium cuts of meat, organic fruit, while Emma stood there in her simple but spotlessly clean clothes, returning the one quality item she had allowed herself to pick out for her children. The irony was almost too cruel to bear, surrounded by so much abundance, while she could barely guarantee one decent meal a day. "Mommy, don't cry," Mason said suddenly, reaching a small hand up to touch his mother's face. Emma hadn't even realized a single tear had slipped free. She forced the smile she had perfected over the past 2 years, the one that said everything is fine, even while everything was quietly falling apart. "Mommy's not crying, sweetheart. It's just the wind," she lied, gently kissing his warm forehead. Across the main aisle, near the shelves of premium wine and imported champagne, a man in an impeccable suit watched the entire scene unfold with a growing, uneasy tightness in his chest. Nathan Sterling, 42 years old, was considered one of the most successful businessmen in the country. His real estate and construction empire had made his family name one of the most powerful and respected in the city. He owned mansions, luxury cars, a yacht, everything money could buy. But in that moment, watching that woman, none of it mattered, even a little. Because he recognized her. He recognized every graceful movement, every gentle gesture, every curve of her face. Even after all these painful years, it was Emma. His Emma. The woman who had once been his entire world. The realization hit him like a fist to the stomach, stealing the air from his lungs. The woman he had loved with everything he had. The woman who had vanished from his life years ago, under circumstances that still haunted him every night, was standing there, only a few feet away, living a reality he never could have imagined for her. And she wasn't alone. She had twins. Nathan's knees nearly buckled as he studied the 2 children more closely. The boy had his eyes exactly the same deep brown, expressive eyes that had marked the Sterling family for generations. The girl had Emma's same delicate features, but with a shape to her face that he recognized painfully as his own. "It can't be," he murmured to himself, gripping a bottle of champagne he hadn't even realized he'd picked up, as though it were a life raft in the middle of an emotional shipwreck. The children were the right age. The timing matched perfectly with the last time he and Emma had been together. Every detail in their small faces confirmed his most terrifying and most wonderful suspicion. Emma carefully arranged the few groceries she'd managed to buy with her limited money. A bag of plain pasta, a few slightly bruised bananas on sale, a jar of applesauce with a damaged label that had cut its price in half, and 2 small apples. Every movement was precise and economical, as if calculated not to waste a single ounce of energy or draw any unwanted attention.
"Mommy, I'm hungry,"
Sophie murmured quietly, resting her small head against her mother's shoulder. Her words were few, but each one carried a weight that made Emma's heart ache from the inside. "I know, my little princess. We'll be home soon, and Mommy will make that pasta you both love." "Okay," Sophie answered with a tenderness that made Emma's chest tighten, even though she knew it would be plain noodles again. No sauce, no cheese, nothing but salt and a drizzle of oil. "Mommy milk," Mason repeated insistently, pointing at the carton that had been returned to the shelf behind the register. His sweet, hopeful little voice broke the heart of everyone within earshot. Emma kissed his warm forehead, whispering words of comfort that even she struggled to fully believe. "Soon, my love. Mommy's going to find a way, I promise. I always find a way, don't I?" She was speaking more to herself than to the children, a desperate little mantra of hope. Caleb, the young cashier, watched the whole scene with a tightness in his chest. He was a kind young man, the son of a working-class family himself, and he saw his own mother in this woman. "Ma'am, I can just—" he began, but Emma shook her head immediately. "Thank you, but that's not necessary. We'll manage." Her dignity was fierce even in the middle of total vulnerability. At the back of the store, Nathan was fighting a storm of emotion that threatened to destroy him completely. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he watched the woman who had once been his entire world display a strength and dignity that left him both proud and shattered at the same time. How had Emma ended up here? How had he let this happen? Where had everything gone so wrong? The questions hammered at his mind like merciless blows, each one bringing a deeper wave of guilt than the last. Emma turned slowly toward the exit, balancing her modest bags in one hand and Sophie on her hip, while Mason walked determinedly beside her, his small legs working hard to keep pace with his mother. It was the kind of scene that could break the heart of anyone with even a shred of humanity, a young mother fighting the world alone with a strength that seemed almost impossible for someone so young and outwardly fragile. It was exactly then that fate decided to intervene cruelly. Mason, hurrying to keep up with his mother, tripped over his own small, clumsy feet. The boy hit the cold floor with a dull thud, scraping his knee and bursting into a desperate cry that echoed through the store like an emergency siren. Emma dropped her bags, immediately scattering bananas across the floor, and knelt to gather Mason into her arms, while Sophie also began to cry, frightened by her twin brother's distress. There she was in the middle of the most exclusive grocery store in the city, holding 2 inconsolable children, while dozens of shoppers walked past, some stopping to stare with that uncomfortable mix of pity and discomfort so often shown by the wealthy when confronted with the raw reality of poverty. "Shh, sweetheart, Mommy's here," Emma murmured against Mason's damp hair, her own voice thick with emotion she fought to control. "Let Mommy see that little scrape." The boy's knee was scraped, a few drops of blood mixed with dirt from the floor. Nothing serious, but for a hungry, exhausted toddler, any pain becomes pure devastation. Emma searched desperately through her worn purse for a tissue, anything to clean her son's wound. That was when a shadow fell over them. "Please, let me help." The deep, familiar voice made Emma freeze completely. Her eyes went wide with pure shock as she looked up and found herself staring into the same brown eyes that had haunted her dreams for years. Nathan Sterling was kneeling beside her, holding out an immaculate silk handkerchief. "Nathan." His name escaped her lips like a ghostly whisper, carrying 1,000 unresolved emotions. Time seemed to stop completely. The noise of the store vanished, and for one endless instant, only the 2 of them existed, along with the painful memories that connected them. "Let me take care of this," Nathan said softly. Mason stopped crying instantly, mesmerized by the kind eyes of this elegant man who had appeared like a guardian angel. "You're really tall," the boy said with the brutal honesty only children possess, making Nathan laugh nervously. "And you're very brave," Nathan answered, his voice catching. Being this close to the boy, seeing up close these facial features that were unmistakably his own, was shattering his heart into a million pieces. "What's your name, champ?" "Mason," the boy said proudly, having completely forgotten the pain. "And that's Sophie. We're twins." "Mason and Sophie," Nathan repeated slowly, as though he were carving those sacred names into his very soul. His eyes met Emma's over the children's heads, and the intensity of that look made her feel as if she were being truly seen for the first time in years. Emma fought against a whirlwind of emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Anger, pain, nostalgia, buried, love, fear, all of it churned together in her chest like a devastating storm. This man had torn her life apart years ago, and now here he was, appearing at the exact moment of her greatest vulnerability. "We don't need your help," she said coldly, trying to sound firm, though her voice betrayed the emotion boiling underneath. "We were just leaving. Nathan, please." Nathan rose slowly, helping Mason to his feet. Just let me help with the kids. They're hurt, tired." "No." The refusal came out harsher than she intended. "We don't want pity." But Mason, with the typical innocence of a small child, had already wandered over to Nathan, fascinated by the gold watch gleaming on his wrist. "Is that real gold?" he asked, eyes wide. "Yes, it is," Nathan smiled, crouching down to Mason's level. "Want to see it up close, buddy?" "No," Emma cut in quickly, but it was already too late. The boy was completely charmed by this kind man who smelled like expensive cologne and treated him like he was special. Sophie, more timid, watched everything from behind her mother's legs, but her curious eyes didn't miss a single one of Nathan's movements. There was something about him that intrigued her, an unexplainable familiarity the little girl couldn't quite understand.
"Mommy, he's nice,"
Mason declared with the absolute authority of his 2 years on Earth. "He has the same eyes as me." The innocent comment struck Emma like lightning. She looked back and forth between Nathan and her son, seeing for the first time, with total clarity, the undeniable resemblance between them. The same shape of the eyes, the same line of the brow, the same way of tilting their heads when they were concentrating. Nathan had noticed it too. His eyes were fixed on Mason with an intensity bordering on obsession, as though he were trying to memorize every detail of that little face, which was practically a mirror of his own childhood. "How old ain't?" he asked, his voice hoarse, though he already knew the answer. 2, Emma answered automatically, immediately regretting having given him any information at all. "But that's none of your business." 2 years old, exactly 2.5 years since the last night they had spent together. Since the terrible fight that had destroyed everything between them, since she had vanished from his life without a trace, carrying a secret that now stood right in front of him, divided into 2 beautiful children who were unmistakably his. "Emma," he said, taking a step toward her. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," she replied, though her resolve was already crumbling. Being near him affected her in ways she had sworn she'd forgotten. "Let's go, kids." But Mason didn't want to leave. He had found someone who paid attention to him, who spoke to him like he mattered. At home, everything was always rushed, always hurried, always his mother's constant worry about finding work, food, enough money to survive one more day. "I don't want to go," the boy said stubbornly, crossing his little arms. "I want to stay with the nice man." "Mason, let's go, now." Emma tried to sound firm, but there was desperation in her voice. Being close to Nathan was tearing down every defense she had carefully built over the years. That was when Nathan did something that changed everything. He called Caleb over, pulling his wallet from his jacket pocket. "Put all of this on my account," he said, gesturing to a cart full of groceries that belonged to another customer nearby. "And add milk, fruit, whatever these children need." "Nathan," Emma protested, but he was already handing his black card to the stunned young cashier. "Please." Nathan turned to her, his eyes pleading. "Let me do at least this much. Let me take care of them, even if it's just for today." The humility in his voice, so different from the arrogance she remembered, caught her completely off guard. This wasn't the proud, unbending man she had known. There was something broken in him now, something desperate that mirrored her own pain. "I don't accept charity," Emma murmured, but her strength was fading. Watching Mason and Sophie eye the bags of groceries piling up on the counter with hope in their eyes was breaking down her resolve. "It's not charity," Nathan said gently. "It's responsibility." The word hung in the air with a meaning they both understood perfectly. He knew. Of course he knew. All it took was one look at the children to understand the whole truth she had been hiding. "Mommy, can I have the milk now?" Mason asked, hopefully, pointing at the cartons Caleb was placing into the bags. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the last of her resistance crumble. As much as she hated to admit it, she needed the help. Her children needed it. "Fine," she whispered, defeated. "But only for today." Nathan smiled for the first time in years, a genuine smile that lit up his entire face. "Thank you," he said simply, though there was a universe of gratitude in that one word. While Caleb finished bagging the groceries, Mason moved closer to Nathan, studying his expensive shoes with childlike curiosity. "Are you rich?" he asked bluntly. "Mason?" Emma scolded, mortified, but Nathan only laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "A little," he admitted. "But you know what's worth more than all the money in the world?" Mason shook his head. "Having a family," Nathan said, looking directly at Emma. "And I just found out that maybe I have one." Nathan's words settled over the grocery store like a quiet confession that transformed everything around them. Mason, completely unaware of the emotional tension building between the adults, remained fascinated by the elegant man who had appeared like a hero in his small life. "Do you have kids?" he asked with the innocent curiosity only children have. Nathan swallowed hard, his eyes searching desperately for Emma's before he answered. I didn't know I had any," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "But now I think maybe I do." Emma felt her heart racing out of control. He was publicly hinting at what they both knew to be true. A truth she had kept as a painful secret for over 2 years. "Nathan?" she said in a warning tone, but it was already too late. Sophie, who had remained quiet in her mother's arms until then, reached her small hands toward him with an inexplicable trust. "Will you hold me?" she asked, in her sweet little voice, instantly melting whatever resistance he had left. "May I?" Nathan asked Emma, though he didn't wait for an answer. With trembling hands, he took Sophie into his arms, and the moment she nestled naturally against his chest felt like a small miracle. It was as if she had always known he was her father, as though some deep instinct connected her to this man who shared her blood. "You smell nice," Sophie murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. "Just like Daddy." The innocent words struck everyone present like a bolt of lightning. Emma went pale. Nathan felt hot tears burning his eyes. Even Caleb, still bagging groceries, stopped completely to process what he had just heard. "Sophie," Emma said desperately. "You don't have a daddy, remember? We've talked about this." But Mason, always observant despite his young age, looked back and forth between Nathan and his sister before fixing his eyes on his mother with an unsettling seriousness. "But he has the same eyes as me, Mommy. And Sophie said he smells like Daddy. How does she know what Daddy smells like if we've never had one?" The innocent, devastatingly logical question made Emma feel as though she were being stripped bare in public. Her deepest secrets, carefully guarded for years, were being exposed by the brutal honesty of her own children. "Kids have big imaginations," Emma tried to explain, though her voice sounded false even to her own ears. "You see daddies on TV and books." "No," Mason interrupted with the stubbornness typical of his age. "It's different. When I look at him, I feel something here." He pointed to his chest. "Just like when you hug me." Nathan could no longer hold back the tears rolling silently down his face, standing there holding this little girl who was clearly his daughter, listening to his son describe an unexplainable connection to him, was breaking and rebuilding his heart at the very same time. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Emma whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. The question she had avoided for more than 2 years finally hung there in the air like an emotional guillotine. Emma glanced around, realizing that several people had stopped to watch the dramatic scene unfolding in the middle of the grocery store. Some whispered to one another, others discreetly snapped photos on their phones. "Not here," she pleaded, her dignity fighting against the public exposure of her private life. "Please, not here." But Nathan couldn't simply let it go. He had lost 2 years of his children's lives, 2 years of first words, first steps, first discoveries. 2 years watching in his mind Emma struggle alone when he should have been by her side taking care of his family. "Then where?" he asked, an urgent desperation in his voice. "When did you disappear from my life without a trace?" "I looked for you, Emma. I checked hospitals' records. I hired private investigators. How could I have helped if you never gave me the chance?" "You made it very clear that night that you didn't want anything to do with me." Emma shot back, her buried pain finally finding a voice. "You said I was just a distraction, that your family would never accept someone like me, remember? A waitress has no place in a Sterling's life." The words cut into Nathan like blades, forcing him to remember the worst night of his life, the night when, pressured by his mother and his business partners, he had said terrible things to Emma in a failed attempt to protect her from the cruel, judgmental world he lived in. Words he had regretted the very next second, but could never take back. "I didn't mean any of that," he whispered, holding Sophie tighter against his chest. "I was being pressured. I was afraid my family would hurt you. I thought if I pushed you away, you'd be safe." "Safe," Emma laughed bitterly, tears finally spilling from her tired eyes. "You left me alone, pregnant with twins, with no money, no job, nothing, and you still believed you were protecting me." The revelation of the pregnancy hit Nathan like a gunshot to the chest. He had suspected it from the moment he saw the children, but hearing Emma confirm it made everything terribly, unbearably real. She had faced a twin pregnancy alone. She had given birth alone. She had raised 2 children alone while he lived his privileged life, never even imagining he was a father. "My God," he murmured, looking at Mason, then at Sophie in his arms. "I'm a monster." Mason, seeing tears in the eyes of the man he had just met, but already considered special, walked over and took Nathan's free hand. "Don't cry," he said, with the same tenderness he had shown his mother moments earlier. "My mommy always says crying is okay sometimes, and after you feel better." The child's innocent wisdom, so much like his own personality as a boy, broke Nathan completely. There was his son trying to comfort him, being kind to a stranger who was in truth the most important person in his life, without even knowing it. "You're right, champ." Nathan managed to smile through the tears. Sometimes crying does help. Emma watched the exchange between father and son with her heart shattering. No matter how much she wanted to deny it, it was impossible to ignore the natural connection between them. Mason had attached himself to Nathan in a way he had never shown toward any other man. And Sophie was practically falling asleep in his arms, completely relaxed and safe. "She never does that," Emma admitted reluctantly. "Sophie doesn't like strangers. She's very shy, very cautious." "Maybe I'm not a stranger to her," Nathan suggested, gently stroking the little girl's soft hair. "Maybe she recognizes something in me the same way I recognized something in her the moment I saw her." Caleb, who had finished bagging all the groceries, approached the group. "Sorry to interrupt, but everything's ready here." Nathan looked at the bags full of food, cleaning supplies, diapers, milk, fruit, everything a family with small children could possibly need. It was far more than Emma had come to buy, far more than she could afford in months of work. "Thank you," Emma murmured, still caught between pride and need. "I'll pay you back every cent." "I don't want your money," Nathan said firmly. "I want much more than that." "What do you want then?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. "I want to know my children," he said simply. "I want to know what they're like, what they enjoy, what scares them. I want to know if Mason likes soccer the way I did at his age. I want to know if Sophie loves music the way you always did. I want to get back the 2 years I lost. Mason tugged at the bottom of Nathan's shirt to get his attention. "I like toy cars," he announced proudly, "and dinosaur cartoons. And my mommy sings to us before bed." "Dinosaurs are amazing," Nathan answered seriously, as if he were having the most important conversation of his life. "What's your favorite?" "Tyrannosaurus Rex," Mason shouted excitedly. "He's big and strong and takes care of his family." The coincidence was striking. Nathan had been obsessed with dinosaurs at that exact age, especially the T-Rex. One more piece of evidence of the connection between father and son. "Mine was the Rex too," Nathan confessed, making Mason's eyes widen with surprise and delight. "Really? You liked dinosaurs when you were little, just like me." "So much that my mom used to complain I never talked about anything else." Nathan laughed, feeling a deep connection forming between them. Emma watched the conversation with mixed emotions. Seeing Nathan interact so naturally with Mason, watching him hold Sophie as though he had always been her father, was stirring up feelings she had tried to bury for years. No matter how much she wanted to deny it, some part of her had always dreamed of this moment. "Emma," Nathan turned to her, his eyes pleading. "Let me drive you home. Let me at least make sure they get there safely. We take the bus like always." Emma answered automatically, though her resistance was weakening. "With all these bags, with 2 small children?" Nathan shook his head. "Please, my car is right outside." "It's the least I can do." Mason clapped excitedly. "We get to ride in a car, a real car!" The boy's reaction broke Emma's heart. Her children had never ridden in a car before, always relying on crowded, slow public transit. Denying them that simple experience would have been pure cruelty. "Fine," she sighed, defeated. "But only to the house, and then you leave." "Of course," Nathan agreed quickly, though they both knew nothing would be that simple after today. As they walked toward the exit, Sophie murmured sleepily against Nathan's ear, "Is Daddy going to leave?" The innocent question made everyone stop. Emma closed her eyes, fighting back tears, while Nathan felt as though his heart might explode from grief and love at the same time. "I don't know, Princess," he whispered honestly. "But I promise you, if I ever have to go, it won't be forever." The parking lot outside Harrington's was lined with imported cars, each one gleaming under the afternoon sun like a carefully displayed jewel. But none of them compared to what waited for Emma when Nathan led them toward a sleek black sedan that looked as though it belonged in a movie. "Is that your car?" Mason asked, eyes wide with pure admiration, his small hand still firmly clasped in Nathan's. "Yes, champ." Nathan smiled, though his eyes were fixed on Emma, watching every flicker of emotion cross her face. He could see the shock, the discomfort, maybe even a flash of anger at the sheer financial gap that separated them. "But you know what's even better than a fancy car?" Mason shook his head, completely captivated. "Having special people to share the ride with?" Nathan answered, glancing meaningfully at Emma and at Sophie, who was still dozing peacefully in his arms. Emma felt a tightness in her chest at those words. During all those years of struggle, she had secretly dreamed of moments like this, moments where she wouldn't have to worry about bus fare, tight schedules, or carrying heavy bags while balancing 2 small children. But now that it was actually happening, she felt small and out of place. "Emma," Nathan said, gently noticing her discomfort. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she lied nervously, smoothing the simple blouse she'd chosen that morning, never imagining she'd run into the wealthiest man in the city. "This is just very different from what we're used to." Nathan stopped immediately, turning to face her. "Hey," he said with a tenderness that reminded her of their most intimate moments years ago. "It doesn't matter the car, the money. What matters is the 3 of you. It's always been the 3 of you." "That's not true," Emma whispered, though this time without anger, only a deep sadness carried for years. "If we mattered, you would have fought for us that night. You would have looked for me the moment you learned I'd disappeared." "You're right," Nathan admitted, his voice breaking. "I was a coward. I let my family convince me you'd be happier without me, that I'd only bring trouble into your life. But not one day went by that I didn't regret that decision." Mason, who had been quietly listening to the adults' serious conversation, suddenly tugged at Nathan's hand. "Why is everyone sad? Let's go for a ride in the cool car." The child's innocence cut through the emotional tension like a blade of hope. Nathan laughed, a genuine, freeing laugh, while Emma couldn't help but smile through her tears. "You're right, champ." Nathan crouched down to Mason's level. "No sadness today. Today is the day I get to meet my children." When Nathan opened the car door, Emma was struck by the luxurious interior. Soft, cream leather seats, cutting-edge technology, and almost sacred silence that contrasted sharply with the constant noise of crowded buses she was used to. It felt like stepping into another world. "I've never ridden in a car like this," Emma admitted reluctantly, while Nathan helped load the bags into the enormous trunk. "And I've never had such an important reason to be inside one," Nathan answered, carefully checking that Sophie, still asleep, was comfortable in the car seat that happened to already be installed, left over from when he'd lent the car to his nephew weeks earlier. Mason was thrilled, pressing every button he could reach, fascinated by the lights turning on and off. "It's like a spaceship," he exclaimed, making Nathan laugh again. "Where do you live?" Nathan asked as he started the engine, which purred so quietly Emma could barely tell it was running. Emma hesitated. Her address would reveal a great deal about her current reality. A tiny apartment in a neighborhood far across the city, in an area he probably didn't even know existed. "Fairview Terrace," she finally murmured. Nathan knew the neighborhood only from his company's development reports. It was an area his firm had passed over for investment deemed to have no commercial potential. A polished way of saying too poor. Knowing that Emma and her children lived there while he owned a mansion in a gated community filled him with devastating guilt. "How long is the bus ride out there?" he asked, already dreading the answer. 2 hours, Emma answered quietly. "With 2 transfers." 2 hours. His children spent 4 hours a day just in transit whenever Emma managed to find work downtown. 4 hours of their childhood lost on crowded buses when they should have been playing, learning, simply being kids. "Emma," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Forgive me. For being a coward, for letting you go through this, for missing the first years of their lives." "Daddy's crying again," Sophie murmured sleepily, making everyone realize she had woken up and was watching Nathan through the rearview mirror. "Sophie," Emma corrected automatically. "He's not." "Yes, he is," the little girl interrupted with the absolute conviction only children possess. "He smells like Daddy and hugs like Daddy, and Mason said he has the same eyes." Nathan pulled the car over to the curb, his hands trembling as he processed his daughter's words. He turned to look at her directly, and for one magical moment, father and daughter studied each other with the mutual curiosity of 2 people who had always known each other in their hearts, but never with their eyes. "Do you want me to be your daddy?" Nathan asked, his voice breaking. Sophie nodded vigorously. "And Mason's too. We always wanted a daddy. We asked Santa and God and the Tooth Fairy when Mason lost his tooth." The child's devastating honesty made Emma begin to cry silently. She had tried to be both mother and father at once. She had given everything she had to fill the absence of a father figure in her children's lives. But it had never been enough. They had always dreamed of a dad, and now here he was. "What about you, Mason?" Nathan asked, turning to his son. "Do you want me to be your daddy too?" Mason thought it over for a moment with the seriousness of a philosopher. "If you're our daddy, are you going to leave, like my friends' dads from the neighborhood do?" The question struck Nathan like a punch to the gut. Even at such a young age, Mason had already observed the reality around him. Fathers who abandoned their families, who showed up only occasionally, who caused more pain than joy. "No," Nathan said, with a firmness that surprised even himself. "If I'm your dad, I'm staying forever. Real dads don't abandon their kids. I promise." Mason extended his pinky finger, a gesture he'd learned from his mother, to seal important promises. Nathan linked his own pinky with his son's, feeling as though he were making a sacred vow. "I promise." "And are you going to take care of Mommy too?" Sophie asked, showing an impressive maturity for her age. Because she gets really tired and sometimes she cries when she thinks we're asleep. Emma closed her eyes, mortified to discover her silent tears hadn't gone unnoticed by her children. She had tried so hard to be strong, to be unbreakable for them. But children always notice more than adults ever imagine. "Sophie," Emma whispered. "No, Mommy, she's right." Nathan interrupted gently. "And yes, I'm going to take care of Mommy too, if she'll let me." The traffic around them continued as normal. People carried on with their lives, never imagining that inside that parked car, a family was quietly rebuilding itself, piece by piece. Nathan started the engine again, but this time, his destination was about much more than simply driving Emma and the kids home. He was heading toward a future he had always wanted but never had the courage to pursue. "Do you guys like pizza?" he asked suddenly, an idea forming in his mind. "What's pizza?" Mason asked innocently, and Nathan's heart broke all over again. Emma blushed deeply. Pizza had always been a luxury she'd never been able to give her children. It's a special food," she explained vaguely. "Then let's go find out together," Nathan decided, turning toward the most family-friendly pizzeria he knew. "That's too expensive," Emma protested automatically, her financial survival instincts sounding every alarm. Nathan caught her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Please let me do this. Let me be their dad, even if it's just for today." As they drove toward the pizzeria, Mason peppered Nathan with 1,000 questions about dinosaurs, discovering that Nathan knew just as much about the subject as he had always dreamed a dad would. Sophie asked Nathan to sing, discovering he had a warm, melodic voice that made her relax completely. Emma watched it all in silence, seeing her children discover the father they had always wished for, while fighting the voice in her head whispering that this all felt too good to be true, that men like Nathan Sterling didn't change overnight, that this momentary happiness might turn into an even greater heartbreak. But for now she decided to let herself dream, to let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, her family could finally be whole. Tony's family trattoria was known for its warm, welcoming atmosphere and its special attention to families. But when Nathan Sterling walked through the glass doors carrying Sophie in his arms, followed by Emma holding Mason's hand, every head in the restaurant turned toward them. It wasn't common to see the most powerful businessman in the city in such a simple, homey setting. "Good afternoon, Mr. Sterling." The owner, Tony, approached nervously, clearly surprised by his most prestigious customer's unexpected visit. "Your usual table is available, as always." "Thanks, Tony, but today we'd like a regular table." Nathan smiled gently, squeezing Mason's hand as the boy took in the room with wide eyes. "A table where a family can just be a family." Tony blinked in confusion, but immediately led them to a round table near the window, overlooking a small indoor play area. Mason let go of his father's hand to press his face against the glass, watching other children play with a fascination that broke everyone's heart. "Can I play there?" he asked hopefully, looking at Emma, who automatically checked whether his clothes were clean enough. "Of course you can, champ," Nathan answered before Emma could hesitate. "After we eat, you and Sophie can play as much as you want." Emma sat down uncomfortably in the cushioned chair, her eyes taking in the elegant yet cozy atmosphere. It was exactly the kind of place she had dreamed of taking her children someday, though she never imagined it would be in Nathan's company. "This is really expensive," she whispered, looking at the menu with prices that represented an entire week of her income. "Emma." Nathan gently took her hand across the table. "You have to stop worrying about money when you're with me. I have more than I could spend in several lifetimes. What I don't have are memories with my children. That's priceless." Sophie, who had been quietly taking in her surroundings, suddenly pointed at a picture on the menu. "What a pretty picture," she exclaimed, touching the image of a cheese pizza with her small finger. "That's a pizza princess," Nathan explained patiently. "It's a round flat bread with melted cheese and other delicious toppings." "Cheese?" Mason asked, turning his attention back to the conversation. "I like cheese. Just like the cheese you know, but melted and warm," Emma explained, feeling a pang of guilt for never having been able to offer her children such a simple culinary experience before. Tony returned discreetly to the table. "What can I get started for you?" Nathan looked at the children tenderly. "How about we start with a simple cheese pizza so they can try it, and maybe some fresh squeezed juice?" "Fresh juice?" Sophie asked, intrigued. "Juice made from real fruit, not powder?" Nathan explained once again, realizing just how different his children's reality was from what he had imagined. "Have either of you ever had fresh squeezed orange juice?" Both children shook their heads, filling Nathan with a mix of sadness and determination. He had missed so much time, so many first experiences he should have shared with them. "Then today will be the first time," he declared solemnly. "And I'm going to be right here to see your faces when you try it." While they waited for their order, Nathan devoted himself entirely to the children, asking about their favorite games, their favorite cartoons, their small daily routines. Mason talked animatedly about his collection of bottle caps that he turned into imaginary cars, while Sophie, more shy, whispered about how she liked to sing to her rag dolls. "You sing to your dolls?" Nathan asked, delighted. "What kind of songs?" "The songs my mommy teaches me," Sophie answered, looking at Emma with pure admiration. "She knows lots of pretty songs." Emma blushed slightly. "Just lullabies," she murmured, downplaying her own gift. "Nothing special." "Music is never nothing special," Nathan said firmly, remembering how Emma used to hum softly while she worked back when they first met. "You always had a beautiful voice. I'm glad our kids inherited it." The word "our" settled over the table like an official declaration. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine, hearing him say it so naturally, as though he had already fully accepted his role as their father. When the pizza arrived, the children's reaction was better than any expensive gift Nathan could have imagined. Mason's eyes went wide at the golden circle of dough covered in bubbling cheese, while Sophie clapped delicately. "It's huge," Mason exclaimed. "Bigger than a dinosaur." "It smells good too," Sophie added, leaning in to breathe in the aroma rising from the steaming pizza. Nathan cut small pieces, carefully blowing on them to cool them before offering them to the children. The moment each of them took their first bite would remain etched in his memory forever. Little eyes closing with pleasure, smiles spreading across their faces, small murmurs of approval. "Did you like it?" Emma asked, though the answer was obvious from their happy little faces. "It's the best food in the whole world," Mason declared dramatically, making Nathan burst out laughing. "Better than dinosaurs," Sophie agreed solemnly, which was apparently the highest praise she could give. Emma watched the scene with conflicting emotions. Seeing her children this happy trying things she had always wanted to give them was wonderful, but it was also a painful reminder of everything she couldn't provide on her own. In just a few hours, Nathan had given them experiences she would have had to save for years to afford. "Are you okay?" Nathan asked quietly, noticing her wistful expression. "I'm watching my kids be truly happy," Emma answered honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's beautiful and painful at the same time." "Painful? Why?" "Because I could never give them this," she admitted. "I work so hard, I try so hard, but it's never enough. They deserve more than I can give them." Nathan felt his heart break, hearing the self-criticism in Emma's voice. "Emma, look at them," he said intensely. "Really look." Emma obeyed, watching Mason animatedly explain to Sophie why the melted cheese looked like lava from a volcano, while Sophie hummed quietly, singing a made-up song about the pizza. "What do you see?" Nathan asked. "I see two happy kids eating pizza," Emma answered, unsure. "I see two kind, creative, incredibly smart, well-mannered kids," Nathan corrected. "I see two children who are kind to strangers, who worry when someone is sad, who use their imagination to turn bottle caps into toys." "That doesn't happen by accident, Emma. That happens because they have an extraordinary mother." Tears began forming in Emma's eyes. "But I couldn't even give them pizza until today. And I couldn't give them 2 years of my presence," Nathan replied gently. "You gave them something far more important than pizza, Emma. You gave them unconditional love, solid values, emotional security. You did it alone, facing hardships I can't even fully imagine. You're the strongest woman I know. Mason, who had finished his slice, climbed up into Emma's lap. "Mommy, are you crying happy tears?" he asked gently, wiping a tear from her cheek. "How do you know they're happy tears?" Emma asked, surprised. "Because you're smiling at the same time," Mason answered with the simple wisdom of a child. "You always cry when you're happy, like when we draw you pictures." Sophie climbed onto her chair as well, standing beside Emma. "Don't cry, Mommy. Daddy's here now to help when you're sad." The little girl's innocent declaration created a moment of deep silence. Nathan, Emma, and even the children seemed to understand that something fundamental had shifted between them, that there was no going back to how things had been before today. "That's true," Nathan said finally, his voice thick with emotion and resolve. "You have a dad now, and he's never going to let you go through hard times alone again." "Even when we're bad?" Mason asked shrewdly. "Especially when you're bad," Nathan laughed. "Dads are for helping clean up messes and for teaching you how to make even bigger ones." The children laughed, delighted at the idea of making dad-approved messes, while Emma felt as though she were living inside a dream she never wanted to wake up from. Tony approached the table discreetly. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have a small situation." "What kind of situation?" Nathan asked, immediately alert. "Some entertainment reporters found out you're here," Tony explained quietly. "They're outside, wanting to take pictures. I can't ask them to leave." Emma went pale, instantly. The last thing she wanted was public exposure, especially given her current circumstances, but Nathan was already thinking quickly. "No," he said, surprising everyone. "Nathan, don't!" Emma panicked, but Nathan took her hand firmly. "I'm not going to hide you anymore," he said. "I'm not going to be ashamed of the people I love. If the whole world is going to find out I have a family, let it be today." The camera flashes began even before the reporters had fully entered the restaurant. Emma instinctively pulled Mason and Sophie closer, her face going pale as she realized the scale of what was happening. These weren't ordinary photographers. They were professional tabloid reporters, the kind who turned private lives into sensational headlines.
"Nathan, I can't be seen like this," Emma whispered desperately, glancing at her simple clothes and modest appearance. "Don't you understand? Tomorrow this will be in every paper."
"And you're the mother of my children?" Nathan interrupted firmly, standing up from his chair with a dignity that made everyone in the restaurant stop to watch. "You're the strongest woman I know, and I won't let you feel ashamed of that." Mason, confused by all the commotion, pointed at the approaching reporters. "Why are there so many people with those light-making things?" "Those are cameras, champ," Nathan explained patiently, crouching down to his son's level. "Some important people use cameras to tell stories to other people." "Are we important?" Sophie asked innocently, her small hands gripping Emma's arm tightly. "You're the most important people in the whole world," Nathan answered, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "And it's time the whole world knew it." The first reporters reached the table just as Nathan made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Instead of trying to hide or shield Emma from the flashes, he stood beside her, placing a protective hand on her shoulder and reaching his other hand toward Mason. "Mr. Sterling!" a reporter called out, pushing a microphone toward him. "Can you tell us about this family we just discovered today?" "This isn't a new family," Nathan answered, his voice clear and steady, looking directly into the cameras. "This is my family. Emma is the mother of my children Mason and Sophie, and I've spent the last 2 years of my life being an idiot for not being by their side." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the restaurant, from Tony to the other customers, stopped completely to process the explosive statement they had just heard. Nathan Sterling, the city's most sought-after bachelor, had just publicly admitted he had children with a woman who clearly didn't belong to his social circle. "Mr. Sterling," another reporter pressed, "this family was kept secret. Why come forward now?" Nathan felt Emma tense beside him and realized the questions were hurting her deeply. "No one was being kept secret," he answered with an intensity that made the reporters step back slightly. I was the one too much of a coward to fight for my family when I should have. Emma raised these wonderful children alone, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making up for the years I lost. Mason, who had been watching everything with wide eyes, suddenly let go of his father's hand and walked determinedly toward the nearest reporter. "You're making my mommy sad," he declared with the brutal honesty of children. "She only cries when she's really happy or really sad, and right now she's not happy." The child's innocent comment created an unexpected moment of tenderness that every camera in the room captured. The contrast between Mason's innocence and the intensity of the adult situation around him moved even the most seasoned reporters. "Mason," Emma called gently, opening her arms toward her son. "Come here, sweetheart." But Mason didn't move. Instead, he looked directly at the cameras with an impressive seriousness for a 2-year-old. "My daddy is nice," he announced proudly. "He bought us pizza and promised he's never going to leave." Sophie, not wanting to be left out, also approached the reporters. "And he smells like Daddy," she added solemnly, as if that were the most scientific evidence in the world. The children's comments drew genuine laughter from everyone present, including the photographers, who began capturing more natural, spontaneous moments instead of just formal poses. "Do you like your dad?" one reporter asked, kneeling down to the children's level. "A lot," Mason answered enthusiastically. "He knows everything about dinosaurs and has a car that looks like a spaceship." "And he's not going to leave," Sophie added, repeating the promise that had become the emotional anchor of her small world. Emma watched her children interact so naturally with the press and felt a mix of pride and terror. They were so genuine, so pure in their emotions. It was impossible not to fall in love with them. But she also knew this exposure would change their lives forever. Emma, another reporter, turned directly to her. "How does it feel, this public reunion?" Emma hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. She had never spoken to the press before, never been the center of attention. She began, but her voice failed. Nathan immediately moved closer, offering silent support. "Emma is an extraordinary woman," he said, answering for her. "She raised these children with love, dignity, and solid values, facing hardships most of us can't even imagine. I'm the one who should be nervous, not her. Are you two planning to get married?" The question came from somewhere in the crowd of reporters, making both Emma and Nathan freeze. Mason, who had returned to stand beside his parents, looked back and forth between them. "Getting married is when a mommy and daddy stay together forever," he asked innocently. "That's one way to put it," Nathan answered carefully, feeling the weight of the moment. "Getting married is when two people promise to take care of each other and their children forever." "So, are you going to get married?" Sophie asked hopefully, voicing the question everyone wanted answered. Nathan looked deeply into Emma's eyes, and for a moment that felt eternal, it was as if only the two of them existed in the whole world. "If your mom gives me a chance," he said softly, "I'd like that very much." Emma felt as though her heart might burst. There she was, in the middle of a pizzeria full of reporters and cameras, receiving what sounded very much like a marriage proposal. "Nathan," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Are you sure your family, your business, your whole life, all of it is going to change?" "My life already changed," Nathan answered with absolute conviction. "The moment I saw the three of you in that grocery store today, I realized that nothing I've built means anything without you. I can have money companies' properties, but without a family, I have nothing." The photographers captured every second of the emotional exchange, but somehow in that moment, Emma no longer cared about being there, watching the man she loved publicly admit that she and her children were his priority. It was worth any embarrassment that might follow. "Then yes," she said finally, her voice gaining strength. "I'll give you a chance." "We'll give you a chance," she corrected, smiling through her tears. Mason and Sophie burst into childish applause, not fully understanding what had just happened, but sensing it was something wonderful. Tony, moved by the scene unfolding in his restaurant, began clapping too, followed by the staff and customers around them. "One last question," a reporter called out over the applause. "When did you know you were a father, Mr. Sterling?" Nathan looked at Mason and Sophie, then at Emma, and smiled with a happiness that radiated from every part of him. I knew the moment I saw them. But if I'm honest, deep in my heart, I think I always knew. Some things you just recognize because they already belonged to your soul. Nathan's final words were captured by every camera in the room, and Emma knew that line would become something people repeated for weeks in newspapers and online. As the reporters finally began to disperse, Tony approached the table with a bottle of the house's finest wine. "To celebrate," he said simply. "The most beautiful family we've ever had the pleasure of serving." 3 weeks had passed since that day at the pizzeria that changed everything. The Sterling estate, which for decades had stood as a cold symbol of power and social status, now echoed with children's laughter and the sound of small feet running down its marble hallways. Emma walked slowly through the perfectly manicured gardens, watching Mason teach Sophie how to play soccer with a ball Nathan had bought them. "Careful, Sophie, kick it with the inside of your foot," Mason shouted with the seriousness of a professional coach, while his sister tried to coordinate her little legs to follow his instructions. "Like this?" Sophie asked, kicking the ball, which flew off in a completely different direction, sending both children into fits of laughter. Emma smiled, feeling a piece she had forgotten was even possible. The headlines in the days that followed had been harsh at times, but somehow none of it mattered when she saw the genuine happiness written across her children's faces. "They've adjusted incredibly well," Nathan said, appearing beside her with 2 steaming cups of coffee. It had become a small ritual of theirs watching the kids play while quietly planning the future they were building together. "It still feels like a dream," Emma admitted, accepting the cup and breathing in its comforting aroma. "A few weeks ago, I was returning milk to the shelf in that grocery store, and now you're home," Nathan finished, gently lacing his fingers through hers. "This was always your home, Emma. I was just too much of an idiot to realize it sooner." A shout of joy interrupted the tender moment when Mason managed to kick the ball neatly between 2 rose bushes. "Goal!" he shouted, running with his arms spread wide just like he'd seen on television. "Dad, did you see that?" "I scored a goal." "Yes, I did, champ," Nathan shouted back. "That was the best goal I've ever seen in my life." Sophie ran over as well, her golden curls flying in the wind. "Mommy, I almost scored a goal too," she announced proudly. "Dad said if I practice a lot, I'll play better than Mason." "Hey," Mason protested, though he was laughing. "Girls don't play soccer better than boys." "Of course they can," Emma corrected gently. "Girls can do anything they set their minds to." Nathan watched the exchange with his heart full. In just 3 weeks, Emma had transformed his house into a true home, not only for the children, but for him as well. For the first time in his adult life, he woke up every single day genuinely happy. "Dad," Sophie walked over and tugged at his pant leg. "When are you going to give Mommy the pretty ring?" The innocent question made both Nathan and Emma freeze. They had talked about marriage, but nothing had been made official yet. Nathan had bought the ring weeks ago, but he had been waiting for the perfect moment. "Sophie," Emma began, blushing slightly. "Dad, it's not necessary." "Actually," Nathan interrupted, kneeling down to his daughter's level, "I think this might be the perfect moment." Emma felt her heart race as Nathan pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. It wasn't flashy or overly extravagant. It was delicate and elegant, exactly matching the understated taste he remembered she had always had. "Emma Bennett," Nathan began, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me the 2 most precious gifts I could ever imagine, our children and a second chance. Will you give me a 3rd gift and marry me?" Mason ran over, sensing something important was happening. "Is it now, Mommy?" he asked eagerly. "Is this when you turn into a real princess?" Emma laughed through the tears already sliding down her cheeks. "I'm already a princess, my love," she said, looking between her children and Nathan. "I have the 3 of you. That makes me more than a princess." "So, are you going to marry Dad?" Sophie pressed, clapping expectantly. "Yes," Emma whispered, extending her trembling hand toward Nathan. "Yes, I'm going to marry your dad." The moment the ring slid perfectly onto her finger was met with shouts of joy from the children. Mason began jumping around like an excited kangaroo, while Sophie clapped frantically. "Now we're a real family," Mason declared solemnly. "Forever and ever. Forever and ever," Nathan repeated, kissing Emma gently, while the children wrapped their arms around both their legs. Years later, Emma would often say that morning in the garden had felt more perfect than any wedding in the grandest cathedral could have. There, surrounded by her children's laughter and the love of the man she had almost lost, she finally understood that sometimes miracles happen in the simplest places. Mason grew up keeping his love for dinosaurs, but discovered he loved building things alongside his father even more. Sophie developed a beautiful singing voice that filled the Sterling estate with music every single day. And Emma learned that worth was never about where you came from, but about your capacity to love without conditions. Back at Harrington's Fine Foods, Caleb still worked the register, but now he always smiled when he remembered that special morning he witnessed the beginning of the most beautiful love story he had ever seen. He carried in his heart the certainty that small acts of kindness can change entire lives. Tony framed a photo of the family taken that day at his trattoria and hung it on the main wall with a small plaque that read, "Where families reunite and dreams come true." And Nathan learned the most valuable lesson of his life, that true wealth is never in what we own, but in who we love. That courage is never about having no fear, but about doing the right thing even when your heart is trembling. That family isn't defined by blood or by a last name, but by the daily choice to stay, to protect, and to love. In the drawer of his desk, he kept the receipt from that day at the grocery store, not for its monetary value, but as a reminder that the smartest investment he ever made cost less than $100 and brought him a fortune in happiness. Because sometimes love appears when we least expect it in the most unlikely places and teaches us that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to choose family over pride. It's never too late to discover that real life doesn't happen in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the glorious, imperfect mess of a home filled with love. And so, a story that began with tears in a grocery store aisle became living proof that miracles really do exist. All it takes is the courage to recognize them when they appear.